Rudolf Höss never pulled a trigger himself, but he built a killing machine where murder became routine, silent and efficient. He did this from his comfortable home with his family living yards from the gas chambers. How do you punish a man who never felt sorry? Here's the American English voiceover script, simplified and paraphrased. Rudolf Höss never pulled a trigger himself, but he built a system where killing became routine, quiet, and efficient. He did this from his comfortable home with his family living just a few yards from the gas chambers. From the time he was a boy, taught to obey without question, to his rise as commander of Auschwitz, Höss was the perfect piece in the killing machine. He didn't scream or torture people. He planned and calculated. He organized the system to kill tens of thousands every day. He did it with cold precision, never raising his voice, never asking questions. How do you punish a man who never felt sorry? What really happened in his final days? And what does his trial tell us about the true nature of evil during wartime? The birth of evil. Rudolf Höss was born in the quiet town of Baden-Baden in November 1900. It was an ordinary start for the man who would become the architect of the worst systematic horror of the 1900s. His father was a merchant who had served in the military in Africa. Young Rudolf grew up under strict discipline and rigid Catholic rules that shaped how he saw duty and obedience. The Höss household wasn't a place for personal expression. It was a training ground for following orders. His father Franz had returned from East Africa with clear expectations. His only son would become a priest, no questions asked. This early training in following authority was reinforced by private teachers who continued his training. The boy learned to be quiet, to obey, and to find value in personal sacrifice. He had no close friends, only routines and duties. His only real relationship was with his horse. This small detail shows the deep loneliness of someone who would later order the murder of more than 1 million people without showing any feeling. The break came early. When Rudolf was 13, his father died. This should have set him free, but the empty space was quickly filled by another controlling system. Europe was heating up with pre-war tensions. The teenage Höss, without parental pressure but with his obedience training still strong, found a new system to follow in the army. He lied about his age and amazingly was accepted into the 21st Bavarian Dragoon Regiment, the same unit where his father and grandfather had served. At 14, when most children are barely out of childhood, Höss was already wearing the German imperial uniform. He was sent to fight on the Turkish front as part of the German Asian Corps, fighting alongside the Ottoman Empire in Palestine, Iraq, and Syria. The cruelty of war didn't seem to affect him like you'd expect from a teenager. He was wounded 3 times, caught malaria, and for his steady service received the Iron Cross Second Class and the Iron Crescent awarded by the Turks. Before he turned 18, he was commanding his own cavalry unit. This was an amazing achievement for his age that showed his cool efficiency. The path to darkness. Germany's defeat in 1918 threw Höss into a country he didn't recognize. His mother had died while he was away, and the teenage soldier returned to a defeated nation where chaos replaced order. The Treaty of Versailles imposed conditions that many Germans felt was a betrayal. Höss, trained in rigid systems, found himself in a vacuum of authority that he couldn't stand. Like thousands of confused veterans, he channeled his anger into far-right military groups. The Free Corps became his first political home. These militias, made up mostly of veterans, fought communists and trade unionists while pushing for a radical nationalist vision of Germany. Höss found there a new system to follow, plus a sense of purpose and military brotherhood. In 1919, he joined the Free Corps Rossbach, where his obedience and coolness made him valuable. His move toward extremism found violent expression in 1923. Höss, along with other Free Corps members, took part in the murder of Walter Kadow, a teacher accused of betraying Albert Leo Schlegeter, a nationalist saboteur executed by the French in the occupied Rhineland. The brutality was extreme. Kadow was savagely beaten and killed with a rock to the head. The crime happened on a farm owned by Martin Bormann, who years later would become Hitler's private secretary. This wasn't a coincidence, but the first link in a web of deadly connections. Höss was arrested and sentenced to 10 years in prison for murder. However, prison didn't represent redemption, but rather confirmation. In Brandenburg prison, he shared space with other extremists and was treated as a political prisoner with special privileges. There, his worldview crystallized around the idea of a Germany betrayed by Weimar politicians, communists, and above all, Jews. The Catholic religion of his childhood was finally abandoned, now considered weak and useless. His release came in 1928 thanks to a general amnesty. The man who emerged from prison was no longer a confused young man. He was a hardened nationalist, convinced of a historic mission in German reconstruction. The rise of a monster. In 1922, during a leave before his imprisonment, Höss had attended a rally by the then little-known Adolf Hitler in Munich. The future leader's fiery speaking impressed him, and soon after he joined the Nazi Party, becoming one of its first registered members. After his release, Höss's life briefly took an unexpected turn. He joined the Ardeman League, a nationalist farming organization that promoted a return to the land as purification of the German spirit. There he met Hedwig Hensel, whom he married in 1929 and with whom he would have 5 children. This peaceful period offered apparent stability, but the connection with National Socialism remained hidden. The Ardeman League maintained strong ideological ties with the growing Nazi movement. Hitler's rise to power in 1933 opened new doors for Höss. In 1934, with the party already controlling Germany, he formally joined the SS, the Nazi elite military force. His prison record and disciplined nature made him an ideal candidate for the system the Nazis were building. He was assigned to the Dachau concentration camp, the first established by the regime. At Dachau, under the supervision of Theodor Eicke, Höss learned the basics of what he would later describe as true SS doctrine: absolute obedience, the elimination of compassion, and the systematic use of terror as a tool of control. Eicke wasn't only a fanatical believer in the cause, but also a methodical organizer who was laying the administrative foundations of the Nazi concentration camp system. Höss absorbed these lessons with the same discipline he had shown in the army. His efficiency earned him promotions. He was promoted to block leader and later transferred to Sachsenhausen, another key camp located outside Berlin. There he oversaw executions and sharpened his administrative skills. He was no longer just a guard. He was becoming a vital part in the Nazi machine of oppression. His ability to coordinate complex operations without showing emotion distinguished him among his peers. During this period, Höss developed a close relationship with Heinrich Himmler, the leader of the SS and future architect of the Reich's oppressive system. This connection would be decisive for his future. The birth of Auschwitz. In 1940, when the Germans needed to expand their camp system into the occupied territories, Himmler personally selected Höss for a specific mission: to inspect a former Polish barracks near Krakow that could be converted into a new concentration camp. The chosen location was an unused military compound on the outskirts of a small town called Auschwitz. The Germans called it Auschwitz. What Höss saw in this place wasn't just an opportunity for advancement, but the stage where his obedience, efficiency, and emotional coldness would culminate in the greatest systematic crime in modern history. On May 1st, 1940, Rudolf Höss assumed the position that would immortalize him in the darkest pages of history: Commandant of the Auschwitz concentration camp. The appointment was no coincidence. Höss embodied precisely the characteristics the Reich needed: military discipline, administrative efficiency, and above all, unwavering loyalty combined with a peculiar emotional detachment. The choice of location was based on practical considerations. The former military complex offered usable basic infrastructure: barracks, basic sanitary facilities, and administrative buildings. Its geographical location was optimal, It was situated at a railway junction connecting Germany with the newly conquered Eastern territories, making mass transportation easy. From his arrival, Höss demonstrated a systematic vision. The camp was to be self-sufficient, functional, and expandable. The former barracks were converted to house prisoners, primarily Polish political opponents. In this initial phase, a perimeter of electric wire fences was built, along with watchtowers at strategic points and a wall separating the complex from the outside world. This first development, later known as Auschwitz Commandant, became the administrative center of the entire complex. The command offices, quarters for SS officers, and Höss's personal residence were located there. The commandant moved there with his wife, Hedwig, and their 5 children. The layout of Auschwitz reflected Höss's military and bureaucratic mentality. Rectangular brick blocks arranged in orderly rows, straight streets methodically numbered, and spaces for formations and control. The famous motto, Arbeit macht frei, work makes you free, was posted above the entrance, a cruel irony for those who passed through its gates. The machine of death. The real transformation began after Heinrich Himmler's visit in March 1941. The SS leader was impressed by Höss's organizational efficiency. During this inspection, Himmler personally informed him of expansion plans that would radically change the nature of the camp. He ordered the construction of a second, much larger complex, initially capable of housing 100,000 prisoners, mainly Soviets. This expansion was linked to the imminent Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union that was to begin in June of that year. This new complex, named Auschwitz-Birkenau, was to be built approximately 2 miles from the original camp. Höss personally oversaw the planning, selecting marshy terrain that required extensive drainage work carried out by prisoners under extreme conditions. Thousands died during this construction phase. What would distinguish Birkenau would not only be its size, but its purpose. As Nazi policy became more extreme in 1941, particularly after the invasion of the USSR, the final solution began to take shape. In this context, Auschwitz would transform from a conventional concentration camp into a facility specifically designed for mass extermination. The decisive moment came in September 1941. Höss authorized a terrible experiment in Block 11 of Auschwitz Commandant, known as the Death Block. A group of approximately 850 prisoners, mainly Soviet and Polish, selected randomly were locked in the building's basement. There, SS officers under the supervision of Deputy Commandant Karl Fritsch and with Höss's approval introduced for the first time crystals of Zyklon B, a poison gas originally developed for pest control. The result was considered successful by the executioners. All the prisoners died within minutes without the need for ammunition or direct involvement of the executioners. This moment marks the birth of the method that would become a symbol of the Holocaust. Höss, always methodical, ordered studies on the optimal amount of gas needed based on the volume of the chamber and the number of victims, the ideal temperature to maximize its effect, and the precise timing for subsequent ventilation. Industrial murder. During 1942 and 1943, under Höss's direction, Birkenau underwent a radical transformation. Initially, 2 temporary extermination facilities were built, known as Bunker 1 and Bunker 2, or the Red House and White House, respectively. They were farm buildings converted into gas chambers with improvised crematoriums in outdoor pits. They soon proved inadequate. The industrialization of genocide reached its peak with the construction of 4 large extermination complexes known as crematoriums 2, 3, 4, and V. Each complex featured underground or above-ground gas chambers capable of simultaneously murdering thousands of people directly connected to high-capacity crematoriums. To facilitate this process, Höss ordered the construction of a railway branch that ran directly into Birkenau, terminating at a central platform known as the ramp. There, deportees disembarked the trains and underwent selection. SS doctors, including the infamous Josef Mengele, decided with a simple gesture who would live temporarily as slave laborers and who would be immediately sent to the gas chambers. The efficiency of the system is shocking in its calculated coldness. The new arrivals, exhausted after days of travel in inhumane conditions, were greeted with a false sense of order. They were instructed to neatly leave their belongings for disinfection, undress, and prepare for a shower after the long journey. The gas chambers were designed to simulate bathroom facilities, with fake showers on the ceiling. Only when the doors were sealed shut was the deception revealed. Once the chambers were sealed, SSS personnel would throw Zyklon B pellets through openings in the ceiling or walls. The dyeing process lasted between 10 and 20 minutes, during which the prisoners experienced progressive suffocation and agonizing convulsions. Höss, in his later memoirs, would coldly describe how the bodies were piled up in a pyramid shape, with the strongest at the top desperately gasping for air that no longer existed. The bureaucrat of death. The administration of the complex followed a strict hierarchical structure. Höss, as commandant, held the top position, assisted by several deputies responsible for specific areas. His administrative attention to detail was legendary. He maintained constant communication with SS headquarters in Berlin, sending detailed reports on operational capabilities, the number of processed personnel, and the efficiency of the facilities. The language used in these documents reveals absolute dehumanization. Terms like pieces, units, and material replaced any reference to human beings. His personal life during this period presents a disturbing contrast. He lived with his family in a comfortable villa within the complex, just a few yards from crematorium line. His children played in the gardens while the crematorium chimneys burned constantly. His wife Hedwig maintained a tidy and cozy home, seemingly isolated from the surrounding reality. In his later memoirs, Höss would mention the peace he felt returning to this domestic environment after days overseeing mass extermination. This double life shows what Hannah Arendt would later describe as the banality of evil, the human capacity to compartmentalize existence, to simultaneously be a loving parent and systematically organize the murder of millions. Operation Höss. In the spring of 1944, as Allied forces advanced through Europe and the defeat of the Third Reich seemed increasingly inevitable, an unprecedented extermination operation began to take shape. The architects of the Holocaust, far from halting their work in the face of imminent defeat, decided to speed it up. This final phase, the most intense and brutal of the Nazi genocide, would be directed by the man who had turned Auschwitz into a death factory. Rudolf Höss would return specifically to oversee what would become known internally as Action Höss, or Operation Höss. Until March 1944, Hungary had remained an ambivalent Axis ally. Under Admiral Miklos Horthy, the country had implemented anti-Jewish laws, but had partially resisted German pressure to deport its Jewish population. This community, the second largest in Europe with approximately 725,000 people, had remained relatively protected while millions perished in the surrounding occupied territories. The situation changed dramatically when German intelligence detected contacts between Hungary and the Allies, interpreted as preparations to defect from the Axis. Hitler ordered the military occupation of the country on March 19, 1944. The Hungarian government was reduced to a puppet administration controlled by Berlin, and the SS immediately assumed control of policies regarding the Jewish population. Adolf Eichmann, who had already coordinated deportations from other European countries, was sent to Budapest to organize the logistics. At the same time, Heinrich Himmler requested the presence of Rudolf Höss for a special mission. The Hungarian Genocide. The operation began with military precision. Between April and May 1944, Hungarian Jews were concentrated in improvised ghettos, mainly in rural areas of the northeast of the country. Entire families were evicted with only hours' notice, allowed to take only small personal belongings. On May 15, 1944, the first train departed from Hungary. Over the next 56 days, approximately 147 trains transported more than 430,000 Hungarian Jews to Auschwitz. The operation reached unprecedented levels. On some days, as many as 4 trains arrived, each carrying between 2,000 and 3,000 people crammed into freight cars without bathroom facilities, sufficient food or water. Arrival at Auschwitz represented the beginning of an industrialized process of death. The train stopped at the central ramp at Birkenau, where the deportees disembarked amid screams, barking dogs, and blows. Men and women were immediately separated. SS medical officers dressed in white coats to reinforce the illusion of a medical procedure carried out the selection with almost imperceptible gestures. Left meant forced labor, right meant immediate death. The criteria were brutally practical. Approximately 70 to 80% of each transport was sent directly to the gas chambers. All children and elderly, pregnant women, or women with young children, the sick or weak. Only apparently healthy young men and women were temporarily selected for slave labor. Deception was an integral part of the system. Those selected for death were told they would be showered and disinfected before entering the camp. In some cases, they were even given soap and towels to reinforce the lie. They were instructed to remember where they left their belongings, so they could retrieve them later, a cruel irony considering their immediate fate. During the Hungarian operation, the system reached unprecedented maximum capacity. Höss in later testimony claimed that on peak days, up to 10,000 people were murdered in 24 hours. To maintain this pace, all crematoriums operated simultaneously. When these proved insufficient, open-air incineration pits were reactivated. These pits, dug near crematoriums 5 and 6, measured approximately 160 feet long, 25 feet wide, and 6 feet deep. The bodies were placed in alternating layers with wood and doused with fuel. The heat generated was so intense that body fat became additional fuel. The black smoke and acrid smell filled the atmosphere for miles around. The final days. In January 1945, as the Red Army advanced toward Poland, the sound of Soviet artillery began to echo at Auschwitz. For Rudolf Höss and the other architects of the Holocaust, the hour of collapse had arrived. On January 17th, Heinrich Himmler authorized the complete evacuation of Auschwitz. A feverish destruction of evidence then began. Documents were burned, key installations were blown up, archives were destroyed. In the rush, thousands of documents remained intact, later providing crucial evidence for investigators. The following day, the infamous death marches began. Approximately 60,000 prisoners were evacuated on foot in the depths of the Polish winter to camps further west. Those who collapsed from exhaustion or attempted escape were immediately executed. Around 15,000 died during these marches. On January 27th, Soviet advance units finally liberated the camp. They found approximately 70 prisoners too sick to be evacuated. The soldiers, hardened by years of war, were deeply shocked by evidence of unprecedented industrialized horror. Mountains of confiscated belongings, barracks overcrowded with dying people, and partially destroyed but recognizable extermination facilities. By then, Höss was already operating from Ravensbrück, a camp near Berlin intended primarily for women. In March 1945, facing imminent defeat, he received instructions from Himmler: disappear. The hunt. He carefully adopted the false identity of Franz Lang, supposedly a naval officer with no connection to the SS. With falsified documents, he altered his appearance and headed toward Schleswig-Holstein, a region near the Danish border. He settled on a small farm as a farmhand under his false identity. The strategy initially worked. The former Auschwitz Commandant became an anonymous rural worker, avoiding unnecessary interactions and maintaining an extremely low profile. Meanwhile, the Allies made progress cataloging Nazi war crimes and establishing legal mechanisms to prosecute those responsible. In March 1946, British forces received information about the possible whereabouts of the Höss family. An intelligence team led by Captain Hans Alexander was assigned to investigate. Alexander, a German Jew who had fled to England with his family in 1936, brought personal motivation to the mission in addition to his professional duty. They first located Hedwig Höss. After being arrested on March 8th, she eventually revealed her husband's whereabouts. The capture occurred on the night of March 11th. Alexander's team found Höss sleeping in a shed. He initially maintained his false identity, presenting documents as Franz Lang. Alexander, however, noticed that he was wearing a wedding ring, unusual for a supposedly single sailor. When they demanded to see the inside of the ring, they found the names of Höss and his wife engraved on it. It was definitive confirmation. What was most disturbing to his captors was Höss's reaction. He showed no regret, no begging for mercy, no emotional breakdown. He maintained the same cold, mechanical manner that had characterized him during his command. The Schuritiel. In the spring of 1947, as Europe attempted to rebuild from the rubble of the most devastating war in history, an unprecedented trial began in Warsaw. Rudolf Höss faced the Polish Supreme National Court for crimes that defied human understanding. Post-war Poland was a particularly significant setting for this reckoning. The country had lost approximately 6 million citizens during the Nazi occupation, almost 20% of its population. Of these, 3 million were Polish Jews, almost completely annihilated. The trial formally began on March 11th, 1947. For 3 weeks, the tribunal heard testimony from more than 30 witnesses, including survivors, former guards, and war crimes experts. Among the most shocking was that of Stanisława Rachwa, a political prisoner who had witnessed selections and gassings, describing how Höss watched impassively as he made adjustments to increase efficiency. Also crucial was the testimony of Henrik Tilber, a former member of the Sonderkommando, who detailed the operation of crematoriums and gas chambers from his traumatic experience. When confronted with testimony about his presence at the selection chutes, where he decided who would be immediately gassed and who would be temporarily assigned to forced labor, Höss did not deny his participation. He confirmed that he carried out these selections regularly, and that he sent women with children, elderly and sick people to their immediate deaths because they were unfit for labor. This admission, expressed without apparent emotion, deeply shocked those present. On April 2nd, 1947, the National Supreme Court delivered its verdict. Rudolf Höss was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to death by hanging. The sentence included an exceptional provision. The execution was to be carried out at Auschwitz, within the boundaries of the former camp. The final act. Dawn on April 16, 1947, fell gray and cold over Upper Silesia, Poland. The former Auschwitz complex, where just 2 years earlier the last of more than 1 million human beings had perished, would be the scene of a final act of justice. The execution of Rudolf Höss. The decision to execute him there was not arbitrary. Former prisoner organizations had requested that the sentence be carried out in the same place where he had wielded absolute power. Carpenters, ironically German prisoners of war in Polish custody, built a simple but sturdy gallows next to the former crematorium at Auschwitz, just a few yards from the house where Höss had lived with his family. This proximity between his former residence and the machinery of death had always been a disturbing symbol of his compartmentalization. Now this positioning took on a final dimension. During his final days, Höss had shown subtle changes. The man who had maintained mechanical coolness during the trial began to show introspection. He received Catholic sacraments, returning to the faith he had abandoned decades earlier. On the morning of the execution, he was awakened at 5 a.m. He carefully ate a simple breakfast, dressed in clean prison clothes, and was handcuffed. His last request was to send his wedding ring to his wife, a request that was granted. At 8 a.m., a vehicle transported him from Krakow to Auschwitz. Upon arrival, he was briefly escorted to the former commandant's office. According to witness accounts, he asked for one last coffee, which he sipped calmly. At 10 o'clock a.m., he was transferred to Block 11, known during the camp's operation as the Death Block. He remained in this building, infamous for housing punishment and execution cells, for approximately an hour. Approximately 100 official witnesses were present: government representatives, judicial officials, doctors, accredited journalists, and significantly, former Auschwitz prisoners representing various nationalities who had suffered in the camp. At 10:08 a.m., Höss was led to the gallows. He walked with measured steps, neither hurried nor hesitant. Witnesses would describe his expression as distant and resigned, but not terrified. He climbed the steps without assistance, maintaining the same discipline and control he had exercised as commandant. The Polish prosecutor formally read the sentence. Höss listened without interrupting. When asked if he had any last words, he replied briefly in German, "I regret my actions. I pay with my life." At exactly 10:09 a.m., the trapdoor was activated. The Auschwitz Commandant was left suspended. The body remained hanging for approximately 15 minutes. The medical examiner confirmed death at 10:21 a.m. Höss had died of a broken neck and suffocation. The man who had designed a system to efficiently suffocate millions was now experiencing a similar death, though one that was individualized and preceded by a fair trial. Conditions denied to his victims. According to eyewitnesses, the former prisoners who witnessed the execution displayed neither joy nor vengeful satisfaction. One French survivor described, "I felt no joy. I felt that a certain order had been restored to the universe, but the enormity of what was lost made any sense of triumph impossible." The execution represented much more than individual punishment. It was an act of collective symbolic justice, an attempt to restore moral balance. His execution wasn't merely punitive, but restorative. It reaffirmed the humanity of his victims by treating even his executioner with greater humanity than he had shown himself. 75 years later, the fundamental questions raised by the life and crimes of Rudolf Höss remain urgently relevant. His story reminds us that the most destructive evil doesn't always arise from uncontrolled passions, but frequently from the cold and calculated subordination of basic ethical principles to bureaucratic systems and ideological loyalties. Höss died as he had lived, disciplined, controlled, seemingly disconnected from the full moral significance of his actions. But he died under the rule of law, after a fair trial with the opportunity for defense and appeal. These elements of formal justice represent precisely the principles he had denied to millions.